100 years ago, Connecticut was hit hard by a pandemic, the Spanish flu. 8,500 people in our state died. With us now from the Connecticut Historical Society is historian Natalie Belanger. And Natalie, good to see you here in the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So walk us through what happened with this it began in 1917 or 1918?
1918, so early on in 1918, it was noticed globally that the flu season was a little bit worse than normal. What was unusual about this particular wave of flu is that more young people were getting the flu than normal. But it sort of passed and went on, and summer came and the flu went away, as it usually does. And then in the fall of 1918, it came back. And for the next 3 months, from September through November, the flu raged globally.
And how did they determine this was the Spanish flu?
Well, first off, the Spanish flu is a misnomer. Americans took to calling it the Spanish flu because the first reports that most Americans heard were coming out of Spain. And there's a reason for that. World War I was raging at the time. And Spain was one of the few countries in Europe that wasn't involved in the war, and thus they weren't censoring their press. So it's not that the flu originated in Spain, it's that Spain was the first country that was really talking about it.
8,500 dead, roughly. I know that some of the estimates are in the 7,000 range, but what was it like to be living at that period of time when this was going on? Were there quarantines and things like that?
Well, one major differences I found is that there was not the sort of coordinated state-level response that we're seeing in current times. So it was left up to towns whether to close schools, to impose quarantines, and some towns did, and some towns didn't. New London was the first town in Connecticut hit by this epidemic. It was actually spread by soldiers coming from Camp Devens up in Massachusetts into the port of New London. And so New London closed schools, it closed movie theaters, it closed all public places for several weeks. People were nervous, they were frightened, they didn't know, often didn't know where to turn for good medical advice.
And there was no flu vaccine back then, of course.
No flu vaccine. There were vaccines for other illnesses like smallpox, but not the flu.
So how were people treated?
You mean medically?
Yes, medically.
So the State Department of Health put out posters to inform people about the flu, and they were told that if you are sick, stay home, call a doctor. Most of what people were getting was supportive nursing care, so good nutrition, good hydration, and most people who got this flu recovered. About 40% of the state, the highest estimate is 40% of the state was infected.
Wow.
But most people recovered with good care.
What did we learn from that in terms of what happened after that? Because it didn't come back.
It didn't come back. That strain of flu, I understand, sort of evolved into a just sort of everyday seasonal strain of flu.
What was the hospital setup in Connecticut back then? I know we had Hartford Hospital. There were other hospitals, but they were smaller, and obviously they weren't equipped to do what they are today.
Exactly. There were hospitals, but hospitals were really places where people went when they were very, very ill, or for the surgeries that were capable, the medical industry was capable of then. 35 emergency hospitals were set up in Connecticut during this flu epidemic. But one of the things that really makes it hard to compare then to now is that there was a major war going on. So for example, the war had taken up so many doctors and nurses.
We're looking at some images that from the Historical Society, the beds and and this is a patient being transported.
So it's going to be very difficult to put people who are contagious in isolation wards, for example. They didn't really have the protective gear for staff that they do now. So you'll often see pictures from that time of people covering their faces with face masks, but they're just using pieces of cotton.
And of course, there was no media back then except for newspapers. And
Pretty much.
Was there a panic?
It's interesting because during the war, there was heavy censorship in the United States. And at least one major historian of this flu pandemic, John Barry, has argued that the lack of knowledge and the lack of discussion of the epidemic in the press was a major problem because people were seeing in their ordinary lives people they knew who were sick, people they knew who had passed away, but the press is downplaying it. And he argued that really it made the epidemic worse because people were, it was making people so anxious because they couldn't go to the press for reliable news.
Fascinating information about the 1918 flu pandemic. Spanish flu, but it wasn't Spanish.
Not Spanish.
Natalie Belanger, we thank you so much, and I urge people to check out the Connecticut Historical Society website because there's a wealth of information, all sorts of pictures on it as well.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Natalie. Thank you so much for watching Face and State on this Sunday morning. CBS Sunday Morning with Jane Pauley is coming up next. Thanks for watching. Have a great day, everybody.